Brokaw and his nightly.
Number 2, weather. The weather map. 1 minute.
This prototype anti-satellite system consists of an air-launched miniature space vehicle, a 20-foot-long, two-stage, 1.5-ton projectile that looks very much like a small missile. It's equipped with a cylinder that serves as a sophisticated laser-guided warhead, although this anti-satellite weapon carries no explosives, nuclear or conventional. It uses an infrared homing device to guide it to a Russian orbiting satellite, destroying it in a high-speed collision. ASAT, as it's called, is launched from the underbelly of an F-15 jet fighter plane. At altitude, ASAT will be fired into space and will head into the orbit of its target, possibly a Soviet spy satellite. Nearly 200 members of both houses of Congress are now firmly on record as opposed to ASAT. They say they don't want any nation to test any kind of anti-satellite weapon, saying that can lead only to a dangerous escalation in the arms race. How? Well, first, backers of an ASAT test ban point to the compact size and low profile of the ASAT as it rides aboard an F-15, nothing to distinguish it from a missile. That, they say, will make all F-15s appear as a potential ASAT threat to Russia, giving them an excuse to attack any armed F-15, on the pretext it's carrying an ASAT to be used in a first strike against the Soviets. The bipartisan congressional backers of an ASAT test moratorium say they'll try to cut back on military appropriations for such weapons when those money bills get to the floor this fall. A fully operational ASAT weapon, they say, could bring on World War III, suddenly, without warning, possibly even by accident. Peter Hackus, NBC News at the Capitol.
The Reagan administration today released more information on the so-called yellow rain, and that's an illegal form of chemical warfare. U.S. military officials insist they have solid proof the Soviet Union has used yellow rain in Southeast Asia. Other researchers say it may be pollen from bees. Jack Reynolds tonight with the latest on the administration's case.
Today's report, based on blood samples taken from Lao and Khmer victims in 4 separate attacks, adds to the accumulated evidence that the Russians are still using chemical warfare in Southeast Asia and Afghanistan. It caused expressions of anger on Capitol Hill.
I am deeply outraged by the use of, by the Soviet Union of yellow rain in Asia and in Afghanistan. I think this is one of the most horrible forms of warfare imaginable.
NBC News obtained these exclusive pictures taken in Afghanistan late last year of a Russian helicopter in what was described as a gas attack. The Pentagon admits that the Russians are far ahead of the U.S. in chemical warfare and that they train their men extensively in its use. Reports continue to come in from the refugee camps along the Thai border where Laotian Hmong tribesmen and Khmer say that gas is still used against them. There are similar reports from Afghan refugees along the Pakistani border. Some critics have said the evidence found thus far is inconclusive and could have been caused by a natural local fungus, even bee droppings. But the Americans have managed to get their hands on a contaminated Russian gas mask from Afghanistan, and pictures have been taken of some of the victims in Southeast Asia. Today's evidence is seen by U.S. government officials as the most conclusive thus far.
We have control samples from people who were in the areas at the same times, who were not subject to the attacks. The samples from the victims came out positive for the triclothecenes. The samples from the control people came out negative.
Rather than relying on the pressure of world public opinion to stop the Russians from using chemical warfare, some people think a better inducement would be for the United States to resume production of its chemical weapons. Jack Reynolds, NBC News at the Pentagon.
Moscow.
Defense Secretary Weinberger seemed puzzled today by the Andropov offer of a moratorium on space weapons.
They're the ones who have them at the moment, so it isn't too much of a surprise, but it would be a surprise if it were carried out.
The Russians already have an anti-satellite weapon that can be launched into the same orbit as its target, then exploded close to it like a shotgun shell. The Russians are also capable of modifying existing missiles to intercept satellites, and according to Pentagon reports, they're working on the development of laser systems mounted on space platforms. The first prototypes are expected in the late 1980s. There's been a great deal of defense Star Wars talk recently, of lasers in space, of particle beam weapons and the like. All that may happen in the future, but reality right now is far different. The proposed U.S. anti-satellite weapon is a new miniature vehicle, a rocket launched from an F-15 fighter. In the event of war, especially conventional war, that's intended to destroy the kind of Russian surveillance satellite that could guide backfire bombers to American ships. This rocket will be tested within the next few months, and some experts here at the Pentagon believe that those tests are the reason for Mr. Andropov's call for a moratorium on space weapons. Jack Reynolds, NBC News at the Pentagon.
The following program is brought to you in living color on NBC. It's hot in Vietnam, often hotter than the Mojave Desert. The temperature rises to 120 degrees, and the humidity hovers around 85%. You collapse from heat exhaustion.
Okay, let's go then. You won't slow us up now. Right channel. Take it easy now. Your metal back is on its way in.
I learned that jungle rot can begin in a cut or scratch in a few hours' time, that gangrene can begin in a wound in a day's time, that troops carry 6 canteens of water, and a new man should take about 10 salt tablets a day.
In Seoul, friends and relatives who had gathered to meet the flight were told it might have been attacked. Japanese radar operators had tracked the progress of the Korean plane from this installation at the northern tip of Japan. Their screens showed a large aircraft flying into Soviet airspace and 3 smaller planes moving toward it. The Japanese said those were Soviet fighters, such as these seen in a film released by the American embassy here. Then the larger craft vanished from the screens. The Japanese concluded it had exploded after being attacked. The last radio message they heard was garbled, unintelligible. Pilots who fly frequently from Anchorage to Tokyo questioned how the plane could have wandered so far off course. They noted that 747s are equipped with several navigational systems to help pilots know where they are. Japanese officials summoned the Soviet ambassador and asked him for information about the missing plane. He said he would have to relay the request to Moscow, and he accused Japanese media of mounting an anti-Soviet campaign because they reported the Soviets had shot down the commercial flight. Sakhalin Island is key to the Soviet Union's eastern defense. Visible from Japan's northernmost island, it contains 6 air bases. The most advanced Soviet fighters and radar are stationed there. The Soviets guard the area vigilantly, often detaining Japanese fishing boats that drift too close. The Soviets are so protective that the Japanese were afraid for the safety of the boats they sent out to search.
Muroc Desert Test Center in California, history is made by this aircraft, the XS-1, and its pilot, Captain Charles E. Yeager. This airplane and this pilot are about to be the first ever to fly faster than the speed of sound in level flight. A B-29 will take the XS-1 aloft and launch her at an altitude of about 35,000 feet. The XS-1 is not a military aircraft, but a flying research laboratory designed to test the effects of supersonic flight upon airplanes. It is powered by 4 rocket engines. Its weight empty is less than 5,000 pounds, but it carries 8,000 pounds of fuel. B-29s have done a lot of memorable things, but none of them ever before had a mission quite like this one. And no airplane ever did what the XS-1 is about to do. Cracking the sound barrier in level flight will be more than a spectacular feat. It will also give the Air Force valuable knowledge of the resources of new propulsive systems. Captain Yeager gets aboard the XS-1. It can't be a long flight he's going to have in the little aircraft. At full power, the flight can't last more than 2.5 minutes. But it's going to be a fast one. Ready. The radar crews are ready, too, to do the timing. The only possible method for timing aircraft at extremely high altitudes. There she goes. A big moment in a history-making flight. Now she's approaching the barrier. The speed of sound at 35,000 feet is 660 miles per hour. The really big moment. Through the sound barrier. The first time ever in level flight. For the first time, except in dives, a man has flown an airplane faster than the speed of sound. It earned Captain Yeager many honors, and the historic plane, the XS-1, earned the resting place in the Smithsonian Institution.
Here are the 300, 500, and 1,000 pounders that the Flying Tigers will deliver to the Japs. Everything that can be crammed inside the fuselage of a transport is flown across the hump to China. Even a primary trainer. The hump. 500 miles of the worst flying country in the world. Everything's been easy up to now. As you climb up off the field at Chapua, you can see the dead end of India sealed off by the 16,000-foot ridges of the Himalayas. You have to top these peaks to get to China. To the north are snow-covered Tibetan peaks, rising up to 25,000 feet. To the south are the Japs. Below, barren, frozen wastes and jungle-filled valleys inhabited by headhunters. There's no summer on the hump. Snow always crowns the peaks. Ice hangs heavy in the clouds. Black monsoon storms sweep up from India, screening the peaks and bringing terrific turbulence that has flipped fully loaded transports on their backs. The worst up and down drafts in the world slide around these slopes. Jap fighters from Burma prowl the hump, looking for easy game. There is heavy toll on freight for the 14th. Casualties among transport groups flying the hump are higher than many bomb groups sustained in combat. Many a cargo destined for China is rusting on these peaks. It's a tough job delivering the goods to China. 4 hours of sweating it out each way. Looking for Japs if it's clear, and taking your chances with the weather if it's not. Then finally, you break out over Lake Kunming, nestling in a broad valley 6,000 feet above sea level. led down into the gateway to free China, the home of the 14th, and the back door to Tokyo. This is the end of the line for the hump pilot. He goes back to India for another load, and the 14th takes over. Kunming was the first base of the 14th. One of the first jobs of its pilots was to defend their airfields and keep the hump route open. Here are some of the men who did that job. They are the original Flying Tigers of the American Volunteer Group. Former Army, Navy, and Marine pilots who came to China as civilians on a strictly business deal. $500 a month salary and a $500 bonus for every Jap plane destroyed. In the 5 months after Pearl Harbor, they got 300 Jap planes and lost only 12 of their own pilots. From these original Flying Tigers, the newly organized 14th Air Force got planes, pilots, insignia, a commander, and a great tradition. The planes were battered P-40s with 30 caliber machine guns, museum pieces on any other front, but all they could get in China. But the pilots were battle-wise veterans who now joined the Air Force as majors. The commander was the retired Army captain who led the Flying Tigers, now Brigadier General Claire Chennault. With this motley array of men and planes, he faced a ring of Japanese air bases from Upper Burma to Indochina and prepared to keep the aerial supply line over the hump open. Small wonder the Japs thought they could blast these Americans out of China. The stakes were high when they tried. If they knocked out the Air Force, they could close the hump. Without the hump, China would be cut off from the Allies and virtually out of the war. Again and again, the Japs sent big formations of fighters and bombers against the American air bases around Kunming.